Well, welcome to Business Spotlight, where we share insights, reflections, advice, and pearls of wisdom from local business owners. My name is Ceri James. I'm a business owner and facilitator. But today, the Business Spotlight is on founder and production director of Listening Dog Media, Callum Marks. Good morning to you, Callum.
Good morning.
How's it going today? All right?
Yeah, okay, thanks. How about yourself?
Yeah, very well indeed. Callum, let's get stuck straight in. Give us a little bit of history, if you may, please, to Listening Dog Media. How long have you been in business, and what is it you specialise in, please?
So we're currently we've just had our fourth anniversary, so a fairly new company, and we predominantly focus on podcast production. So that will be either we produce podcasts for companies, we produce original content, which we sell advertising space on, and then we can get commissioned as well by companies like people like the BBC, Spotify, Audible, places like that. So yeah, that's a very quick top line as to what we do.
And we had before this video, with a quick chat, didn't we? And I'm intrigued to know that the level of growth of the podcast market. One of the thoughts I had was the easiest way to grow a business is to operate in a growing marketplace. So in the business setting, you've got the high performance podcast, you've got the diary of your CEO, and a whole tranche of other ones. Certainly in the sporting space, there's massive growth, I'm sure, in the number of podcasts. So give us a bit of a sense of how much the market has grown over the last 2 or 3 years, please, Callum.
Yeah, so I think the difference that we found is when we first started, it was really difficult trying to explain the idea of a podcast to people, especially commercially. So I think people within audio obviously knew about it. So both myself and Chris, who founded the company, come from a radio background. And yeah, so obviously we were aware of podcasts, but then people outside of that didn't really understand what they were. So when we were having conversations with people about sponsoring a podcast, for instance, we were trying to sell the idea of what a podcast was, because it's very different to people naturally make the assumption that it's just like radio, but it's a very different medium in a sense. And from my personal point of view, I think it's a much better fit for commercial partners, simply because with radio there's a lot of wastage. With podcasts you can be quite niche and quite targeted in who you attract. So getting that message across was really difficult. Whereas now it's not so much that. I mean, podcasts are everywhere. People are aware of what podcasts are. Obviously, tons of celebrities are doing podcasts, which obviously make it more visible. But other broadcasters and tech companies have really invested in it as well. I mean, BBC Sounds run adverts on their TV channels and radio channels for the latest podcasts. You got media conglomerates like Global Radio Media. They have a podcasting arm now and promote their podcast quite heavily across all their radio stations like Heart, Capital, Smooth. So it's become much more mainstream, even in this short period of time, really.
And what do you think has driven that? Is it a combination of lockdown and the digital revolution, or what would you say are the main drivers behind that?
I think it's a change in habits. So I think people are a bit more live broadcast isn't as essential as what it used to be. So I think that plays a habit. I think in terms of people getting involved in podcasts, I think it's much easier now for people. If you're a celebrity, it's easier to do a podcast than it is to go and do a TV show. For instance, why obviously the money probably isn't as lucrative as you would get from TV, but the time commitment and everything like that is so much easier. And especially now, I think lockdown accelerated that as well. I mean, we're predominantly remote, so we do. In fact, I've got a recording straight after this one. We've got presenters in 2 different locations. We've got a guest in another location as well. But it's just like this. Obviously, we're doing this recording on Zoom. But yeah, it's as easy as jumping onto a Zoom call, and the technology has caught up to a point where it's not really too noticeable. Obviously, it will be better quality in a studio, but you can get by with just doing it from your home now. So I think that's certainly helped as well. I think the ease and accessibility of it has certainly helped. that growth.
So what would you say are the key ingredients of a great podcast? And if I may ask you what your favorite podcasts are?
Well, that's a good question. So I like sports podcasts, just simply because I'm a football fan. Manchester United fans will listen to Talk of the Devils, which is a Manchester United podcast. So I listen to that. There's the current J.K. Rowling podcast that's out as well that I've just started getting into as well. So I don't think I could really pin on what my favourite one is, but I think the best ones are the ones that either are really informative but have a bit of personality about them, which I don't think you can necessarily get too much from the radio. Whereas with podcasts you can be a bit loose. So we do a weekly football podcast, for instance, with David Seaman. So with that one, we're very conscious it's not match of the day. It's a bit more of it's personality driven, I think, is the way to do it. So as long as you've got people on there that've got interesting stories to tell, can tell them in a fun way, I think that's the magic ingredient, really. It's personality.
Okay. So the awareness and understanding of podcasts has gone up hugely, which has clearly helped your business. What would you say are the current challenges you face as a business, Callum?
I still think there's maybe a little work to do commercially and make brands aware that actually, no, this is a real commercial proposition for you as well. I think brands find it difficult. The numbers in podcasting aren't as big as what you'll see in radio. And I think there's some work to be done there from the podcasts in the industry side of things. But for a commercial point of view, I think it's making them aware that actually, no, look, you can be really targeted. This is why social media advertising has taken off, because you can really target who you want to, which obviously with TV and radio, you don't necessarily get that as much, whereas podcast really offers that. And the technology is caught up now as well. So we can, even with a podcast, it's not a case of everyone who listens to your podcast will hear the same advert. That is something that's possible, but now we can localize adverts as well. So I could run an advert for a company up here in Manchester, for instance, and obviously it would only get to people in Manchester, which again is very different to what you'd get with other mediums, really.
So what are the main challenges you're getting with that point then, Callum? Is it positioning podcast versus radio, or what are the main challenges?
I think the difference is, I think people, when they see podcasting as broadcasting, and when you look at broadcasting in other senses, the numbers are quite big, but there's a lot of wastage with that. So it's trying to get the message across that actually the podcast numbers may be small, but the percentage of the audience that are actually interested in what you're trying to sell to them is much higher than it is on other forms of media. So actually it's much more cost effective, because obviously you're not going to spend as much advertising on a podcast than you would do on a radio campaign or a TV campaign or anything like that. But you can be very specific in who you hit with it as well. So I think that's the challenge that the industry needs to sort of find a solution to, and making that awareness to people that aren't basically within the industry, basically.
Mm-hmm. And so who would your ideal target clients be then? Do you work in specific sectors or area, or what would be a great client for you?
It's really tough to sort of pinpoint it, to be honest, because I mean, we, like, from a commercial point of view, if we're looking at sponsors, we have a number of different podcasts which target different audiences. So we have obviously a football podcast, we have a parenting podcast, we have a music podcast. So you're looking for people within those areas, really. So I mean, we've worked with, particularly like the parenting podcast, we work with brands that are targeting more mums and that kind of thing. So people that, like, homeware has been quite a good one for us as well, in that sense. So it's more tailored towards the podcast in a sense. And then I don't think there's really a limit on if a brand is looking to do a podcast. I don't think there's really a set limit on who that could be. I don't think it's decided by industry. I mean, I've had conversations with people, even companies like surveyors, who are interested in starting podcasts and stuff like that as well. So it's not really limited to set industries.
So does it start with designing a target audience you want to advertise to and working back to the podcast, or does it generally start with the topic and themes in the podcast and then open up opportunities for you to attract advertisers? How does that kind
Yeah,
of
so
operate?
that's the aim. So we come from a content background. So content is probably much higher on our list, and the quality of what we put out. And then the aim is that advertisers come after that. Now, if I'd come from a sales background, I don't know if that'd be the same answer. But coming from content, that's kind of where our philosophy is: get the product right, and the advertisers will follow.
Interesting. Okay. So what about your aspirations for Listening Dog Media then, Callum? Where do you see yourself going over the next 5 years or so?
Ideally, just continued growth. So I think you mentioned it before, but obviously, podcast is like a growth industry as well. So it's utilizing where podcasting is going. Now, I'm a big believer in a podcast isn't just the podcast; it should be a brand. So one thing that we're currently exploring, I mean, we've literally just in this past week or so, we've announced that we're doing a live show with our Seaman Says podcast in London. So we'll take the podcast live and do it in a theatre there, which a lot of podcasters are doing. And I think it's a way to further monetize what we do and engage with the audience a bit more so. Really, so I'd like to explore more of that, doing more like premium content, so doing ad-free versions, doing there's a movement in the Nordics at the moment where there are premium podcast platforms, so like a Netflix for podcasting. So it'd be interesting to see if something like that is developed here in the UK as well, and then if it is, it'd be something I'd be keen to be a part of as well. So yeah, it's really tough to sort of say hope where it's going to be because the industry's changed so much in the past 5 years. I can't really imagine where it's going to be in the next 5 years, if I'm honest.
And in terms of your team size, then how does that compare now with what you plan or expect it to be in kind of 4 or 5 years' time?
Yeah, so again, it's tough to say, to be honest. So I mean, we would like to obviously like to expand and offer more opportunities. We're only a small team at the moment. It works well for us at the moment, and we tend to work more so with freelancers than we do with staff. Just simply because obviously being a small business, keeping those costs down can be helpful. We can have people work on a project by project basis. I'd say in terms of where we'd want to be with it, probably a few more consistent staff members. With that would probably mean that we have more consistent clients as well. So obviously it feeds into it a bit more. And I think exploring other opportunities aside from just simply advertising.
Okay, so Callum, you say you've been going 4 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
What are the key lessons? What advice would you give yourself if you could give yourself advice on that day one that you started? Now you know what you know now, having had that 4 years of expertise and experience.
I think making sure you invest in your marketing, which can be tricky when you start, because you're wanting to save money where you can. Once you get that, you do see an impact. Obviously, if you get it right. So investing in that, investing in your website, like making sure it's SEO friendly. There's a lot of websites that aren't like that. And I'll be honest, we've only really started doing some serious work on that in the past 18 months, 2 years, to be honest, but we have started to see a growth in inquiries and that kind of thing just through doing that. And it's all really basic stuff. So it's making sure you get your fundamentals right early doors. But yeah, marketing is the big one. Don't be afraid of spending, I think is the key.
And in terms of your advertising spend or the focus of your marketing spend now, where do you tend to invest your marketing budget in there?
Yeah, so at the moment we're looking. We do more. It's difficult to pinpoint it. So with the original podcast that we do, so the original content, we do more social media driven stuff. I know I keep referencing the Seaman Says podcast, but with that at the moment we're promoting this live event as well. So we're running some social ads, but then we're also teaming up with some big Arsenal fan like Twitter accounts and stuff like that to run competitions. Working with clients that we've previously worked with to do giveaways and do some like big cross promotion. and that kind of thing. So that's the one side. And then when we're looking for people that are looking to create a podcast, then that's more down the SEO side and the digital marketing, LinkedIn, that kind of thing is predominantly where we look.
Very good. Well, it's been really interesting to hear more about podcasts, how they operate, etc. Callum, kind of final question, and I don't know how many Arsenal fans we've got watching the Business Spotlight, but is there any information or promotion or offers or announcements you'd like to share with the Business Spotlight viewers today?
Yeah, so I mean, we would one thing that we're keen to do is obviously chat with any people that have got a podcast idea. If there's something that you've thought, actually, everyone sat around, I think, at some point and gone, oh, that'd be a great podcast. So if anyone's got anything like that, I mean, we've always got our ears open, ready to have a conversation with anyone that doesn't really know how to do it. So yeah, just send me an email. My email's callum@listeningdogmedia.com. and we can have a free, no obligation chat, just some advice on how to actually get your idea off the ground.
Great. So what we'll add your link into the distribution of this video, of course, as well. So what would you encourage people to think about if they've got a seed of an idea for a podcast? What sort of questions do you think they should be asking themselves?
I think it's worth the main thing that I say to people is if you were sat in a pub and you were listening to someone have a conversation on the next table, do you feel like you want to get involved in that conversation? Now, if the idea that you've got feels like that's a conversation that someone would want to get involved with, then it's a good idea.
The pub test. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I would say that's probably the key thing.
Very good. Callum, it's been fascinating. Thanks so much for your time and your contribution, and all the very best with your business.
Pleasure. Thank you.